Senator Ted Cruz is usually one of the craziest members of the Senate who is willing to do and say the most damaging things to our country. But recently, he had a comment about the January 6th riots that was actually incredibly rational, but he's getting a lot of backlash about it from right wingers. So without further ado, let's hear what he had to say.
Republican senators. What are they busy doing? Well, they're busy repeating the talking points that Merrick Garland has written for them. Here's one example.
We are approaching a solemn anniversary this week, and it is an anniversary of a violent terrorist attack on the Capitol, where we saw the men and women of law enforcement demonstrate incredible courage, incredible bravery, risk their lives to defend the men and women who serve in this Capitol.
Now, let's be honest, everyone who's conservative appreciates Ted Cruz. You may not like him, but you gotta appreciate him. He's legitimately smart. He's one of the more articulate people to serve in the Congress, maybe the most articulate. He doesn't use a single word by accident. Every word Ted Cruz uses is used intentionally. He's a lawyer. He described January 6th as a violent terrorist attack. What the hell's going on here? You're making us think maybe the Republican Party is as worthless as we suspected it was. That can't be true. Reassure us, please, Ted Cruz.
So, we played the Tucker Carlson commentary in addition to what Ted Cruz said to kind of kill two birds with one stone here. Ted Cruz says something rational and the right wing goes after him pretty aggressively. And Tucker Carlson is not the only one. John, I know you talked about this a little bit with me on the damage report this morning, but now that the story has kind of settled in your mind, what do you think this means for any Republican lawmaker who might want to speak out against anything that Trump may like, but is actually pretty damaging to our country and could erode our democratic process?
Yeah, look, I think that from the very beginning of Trump's run in 2016, we have had a variety of times where it seemed like people speculated that maybe some sort of alternative could coalesce, some sort of anti-Trump in 2016 alternative. Ted Cruz himself attempted to be that actually during that primary as his presidency went on, and he was an absolute disaster. You had a few Republicans try to band together and maybe talk about potentially doing some sort of primary run or a third party challenge or something like that. And it's just never really worked because the issue with it is that, well, first of all, there's the structural impediments to third parties, but there's just not a base for it. There are just not enough regular conservatives out there that want anything other than Trump branded conservatism. Trump branded now, or potentially even more deranged in the future. And we had maybe, I think, a last gasp of an effort for that alternative after he lost the election. It seemed like, well, maybe this is an opening. I mean, after all, he was rejected by the country. He tried to overturn the election and it didn't work. But the issue was that the base stayed with him. And because the base stayed with him, many of the politicians, regardless of whatever they might think internally about any of this, even the ones that initially were critical of him, they can't continue it because they can't continue as a politician with that position. There's just not a constituency for it. Unless they convert to being Democrats, they can't get elected as Republicans. And so Ted Cruz, he might be willing to make a comment. I doubt it's gonna be sustained. I doubt we're seeing the beginning of a durable change in how he approaches Donald Trump individually or the Republicans' anti-democratic trajectory. And so I just, until Trump is literally gone from the party, like the filet-o fish finally catch up to him and he's just definitely not gonna run anymore. I don't see it happening. And honestly, even once Trump is gone, the alternative is probably gonna be worse. And I don't think it's gonna look like Ted Cruz. I think it's gonna be a slightly more savvy Trump-style whack job.
I wholeheartedly agree with what you said, especially that last part. I don't think that Trump is necessarily the important element to this equation, right? Like for a long time he was, but I do think that there are alternatives who can create a cult-like following similar to what we've seen with Trump. And the reason why I say that is because, Trump's base, while there are people within that base who I think are probably too far gone to persuade to come see the light, there are people who I don't think are necessarily like inherently terrible people, but they've been radicalized, they've been propagandized by this very well-funded right-wing media bubble. And look, people can get radicalized online so easily. I mean, we've seen it happen with QAnon, we've seen it happen in so many different ways. And as long as that right-wing media infrastructure exists, I have no doubt that whoever serves as an alternative for Donald Trump will have the same type of like cult-like following. They have to have some level of charisma, I guess, some characteristics that speak to these people. But I think really the heart of the problem, and not to sound too much like Cenk, because Cenk harps on the media more than anyone else, right? But it is true. The media plays a huge role in what people believe, how they become propagandized, and what exacerbates that is the algorithms online. You know, we keep getting served up more and more of the content that is likely to keep us engaged and is likely to reinforce our preconceived notions. And that is a huge problem. And so Ted Cruz, I mean, this was, if you would have asked me, hey, what would you expect to happen after Ted Cruz says something rational? No doubt I would have predicted this. Of course they're gonna come after him. And Tucker Carlson isn't the only one. Election Wizard on Twitter writes, Bannon began his show this evening by rolling the tape of Ted Cruz's January 6th terrorist comments. My problem is with the gutless Republican Party, they will not take a stand. This is why we've won more elections than we've lost, and we've lost the country in the process, says Bannon.
Well, but you lost the country because you lost the election. That's the whole thing that we're talking about right here. You lost, you dingus, and he knows that. He of course knows that. But he can't say it on air because then he'll be treated like Ted Cruz.
And we can't forget that Ted Cruz isn't completely innocent here, especially when it comes to the issue of the Capitol riots. In fact, why don't we go to the next video and give you a little taste of who Ted Cruz is and the lies he perpetuated about the 2020 election.
We went into this election with the country deeply divided, deeply polarized, and we've seen in the last 2 months unprecedented allegations of voter fraud. This past week, I spent writing out a position and assembling a group that ultimately of 11 senators that we put out yesterday that we will together object to certification in order to force the appointment of an emergency electoral commission to perform an emergency audit of the election results to assess these claims of fraud. We need to step forward and defend the rule of law and protect the integrity of our elections. And what I would urge of this body is that we do the same. That we appoint an electoral commission to conduct a 10-day emergency audit. For those on the Democratic aisle who say there is no evidence, they've been rejected, then you should rest in comfort. If that's the case, an electoral commission would reject those claims.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Arizona that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic?
Mr. Vice President, I, Paul Gosar from Arizona.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I rise up for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, it is.
It is. Now listen, on the other hand, President Trump's rhetoric, I think went way too far over the line. I think it was both reckless and irresponsible because he said, he said over and over again, he won by a landslide. There was massive fraud. It was all stolen everywhere. That's not responsible. And you've never heard me use language like that.
I don't know, John. It seems like Republican lawmakers like Ted Cruz like to have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah, like he gets absolute minimal points literally today for admitting the obvious, which is that it's a terrorist attack. Other than that, he's basically as bad as any of them and arguably worse than many, because not only did he participate as one of those more than 100 Republicans last January 6th, but he was one of relatively few Republican senators that was willing to do it. And Ted Cruz, like some in the we were having this conversation about Sean Hannity yesterday, he might not as enthusiastically convert the Republican Party over like fully into anti-democratic fascism. But if he believes that that's the only way he can get elected, or if he can continue to be relevant in the party, he is perfectly willing to go along with it, and that is morally as bad.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the guy, his wife, his father was insulted by Donald Trump during the 2016 election, during the Republican primaries, and then he turned around and did phone banking for him. It tells you everything you need to know about how spineless Ted Cruz really is.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.